What is good, all you cool cats and kittens? This is your Commissioner Tim back on your screen for Week 6 Power Rankings. This week was pretty interesting. What a week filled with some fascinating fantasy storylines. We've got some rookies busting out, concussions ruling players out on what seems like every team, and we've got Taysom Hill breaking hearts and setting the fantasy world on fire. Before we get started on the video, I also want to give a shout out to Kyle for that awesome editorial piece that you created on the newspaper. I want to continue seeing more of that stuff from you. I also want to have the rest of the managers sort of a call out. We'd love to see sort of contributions on content that all of us can enjoy as the season sort of progresses. And I love that part about our league, and I'm looking forward to more of that. And again, appreciate your work on doing so, Kyle. Or I was trying to pronounce your writer's name. It's a little hard for me to pronounce it with the spell being backwards and everything like that. All right, so let's get kick-started. So we went into Week 5 last week with some really important matchups that carry heavy playoff implications. We could have been entering Week 6 with 5 teams tied at 3-2, fighting for 3 remaining playoff spots behind Kyle, but we're now entering Week 6 with the playoff seed contention likely having passed its peak, as the 2 playoff hopefuls in Full Jerry and Mr. Ambassador both drop back to 2-3, with Cup Canada now rolling 3 straight wins, sitting at a winning 3-2 record for the first time this season. So after Week 5, we've got Moncton Meerkats still on his quest for the perfect season, sitting at 5-0. Trust and Process at sole second, sitting at 4-1. Cup to Canada and Brady Stewart Dynasty at 3-2. Mr. Ambassador Full Jerry at 2-3. 4-Putt getting his first victory, now sitting at 1-4, with Bills Mafia doing his best tanking job for Bijan Robinson, now sitting at 0-5. Don't get me wrong, though. There's several scenarios still over the next couple of weeks where the playoff pictures can still certainly get interesting and pick up steam again. I'll talk about that in the team-by-team review in the power rankings. So let's look at some of the interesting storylines in Week 5, which may carry some season-long implications. I'll get started off on the rookie watch. So we've got now 2 running backs in the top 12. Both were, I think, RB18, RB19 last week. But Damon Pierce and Breece Hall running away with the potential offense Rookie of the Year award type of seasons. Now both of them, like I said, they're in the top 12. Breece Hall sitting at 10, Damon Pierce at 11. I made the call last week. I think both will finish inside the top 8 when the season is all done and over with, and it looks like that is a potential likely scenario. Potential for even having 2 in the top 6, especially with some of the ceiling plays that Damien Pierce has shown that I'll mention in a little bit. By the way, this would be one of the rare years with multiple players finishing inside top 12, as only 12 rookie running backs since the 2015 season have finished as RB1. So if you take away 2017, where we had 4 rookie running backs inside the top 12, that's Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, and Lenny Fournette, there has only been 8 players in 6 seasons who finished inside the top 12. So, I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And talking a little directly about Breece Hall and Damien Pierce. So Breece Hall had 197 scrimmage yards with 1 touchdown. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Probably had 3 touchdowns, as they gave 1-yard goal line carries over to Michael Carter, which probably should not be the case in another couple of weeks. Increase in snap share every single week. Up from 29% in Week 1 to 69% in Week 5. I think Breece is on his way to become a full workhorse, will likely command 75% snap share by the midseason. And Damon Pierce is already a full workhorse. Snap share has been increasing consistently increasing week over week, with Week 5 now at 79%. So I originally thought Damon Pierce would be like an early down workhorse, like a Nick Chubb and previous season's versions of Derrick Henry in terms of role, but Pierce is actually getting involved in the passing offense too. So he's actually had more targets than Rex Burkhead in the last 2 games now. So this actually increases his ceiling tremendously for the rest of the season. I'd say both Breece and Damien will finish neck and neck in terms of the total season output at the end of the season. And Kenneth Walker, the third season starts now. So he obviously struggled a little, in the early season in the first 3 games. Largely, I think it's because of the injury he had in the preseason with his hernia. I think it was largely due to his playbook awareness, and he's had a couple plays where he just went the complete wrong direction on some of the snaps in the earlier games of the season. But he's now thrust, whether he's ready or not, into a pure workhorse role now, I would say presumably, as Rashad Penny may be out for the entire season on a potentially broken tibia. So that said, unlike Damon Pierce, Kenneth Walker has yet to see any involvement in the passing games, garnering just 6 receptions over the 4 games that he's played. He's also had, but looking at his collegiate numbers, he's also had only 5.4% of collegiate target share. And most of the time you want to be able to see collegiate target share being 10% plus as a sort of an indicator of the passing work that these running backs will be able to do once they get into the NFL. But that said, we've seen other sub 10% target share running backs driving this year in passing, like Damon Pierce. I think Damon Pierce was at 4.8%, albeit Damon Pierce was a part-time player, so that figure's probably more like 8 to 9% for the snaps that he has played, which gets closer to 10% for Damien. So I think this is going to be really, really interesting. Obviously, he's going to have at least the full workload of the early downs, which is probably going to get him at least a RB2 type of output for the rest of the season. I'll say mid RB2. That said, if he's able to get maybe 10% plus in the passing offense, sort of similar to what we're seeing with Damien Pierce, there's a potential that Kenneth Walker can still finish in the top 15, even though he's really only played all the games going forward as a starter. He's got that type of ceiling to finish inside the top 15. I've got more slides on Rookie Watch, so let's sort of continue that. So on the only Rookie of the Year race that we care about, in terms of Vegas, the current consensus in Vegas is a 3-headed race between Damon Pierce, Breece Hall, and Chris Olave, all sitting at plus 500. That said, Kenny Pickett is now at plus 700, and that odd's probably going to get better over time, given that he's now given the full starting workload, and he looked pretty good, followed by Drake London at plus 850. That rounds out the top 5. Looking at the receivers, rookie receiver-wise, it was relatively quite weak, as Chris Olave sitting at wide receiver 13 for the season through 5 weeks. He's the only highly drafted and anticipated rookie scoring decent numbers for this past week, but watch out for George Pickens and Alec Pierce, because they've now pieced together promising back-to-back weeks with 10-plus points in both of those weeks, with increasing opportunities for them. Talking specifically about these sort of 2 receivers, Alec Pierce looks like he's benefiting from the simplicity of the opposing defenders, just game swinging away from Pittman, at least on the passing offense. With Jonathan Taylor coming back soon, I think that's going to be an interesting wrinkle on seeing how that gets impacted. It could be positive, it could be negative, but we'll have to see. George Pickens looks like he's Kenny Pickett's favorite receiver. He may have also the largest catch radius of all rookie receivers, maybe even one of the top in the league right now, with just the types of catches he's showcased over the last 2 weeks. So that said, in terms of wrapping up the receiver rookies, I think Olave will finish still inside the top 15 this season. George Pickens likely finishes inside top 25, I would say, and Pierce should have a serviceable week, a couple here and there depending on injuries and opportunities, putting up sort of top 36 wide receiver type of numbers. All great rookie seasons relative to their hype and draft capital and positions for sure. Okay, moving over to quarterback, the only rookie quarterback worth mentioning for this entire season will likely be Kenneth Pickett. So on this game, granted the game script allowed for it because the Steelers were down, they only had 3 points against Bills putting up 30 plus. That said, Kenny Pickett threw for 52 times, which is 14 more times than Trubisky's season high for the Steelers. Pickett has yet to throw for a passing touchdown, but I already feel comfortable saying he's a better quarterback than Mitch Trubisky. The interesting thing is he put up 300 plus, passing yards against the Bills offense, and the Bills haven't had a single team over 300 total yards for the season, but Pickett himself threw for 327 yards against one of the best defenses in the Bills. This kid can ball, and especially given Pickett played against the Bills, I'm sure Commissioner Brandon will watch every single snap of that game this past Sunday, and it makes sense why Brandon is starting to get a man crush on this Pickett kid. For me personally, I think the Rookie of the Year race will come down to Pickett and Breece Hall. All right, so here's something I wanted to share. I saw a really interesting tweet regarding fantasy quarterback output today, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So since 2017, and not counting this season so far, the average scoring output per game per top 3 quarterback versus the next 8, so the 4th through the 12th, have been just 4 points. So basically, the average gap between the Mahomes, Lamar, Josh Allen tiers of quarterbacks since 2017, compared to the Derek Carrs of the league, have only been a difference of 4 points a week. This season, however, it's 8 points. And obviously, it's compounded in our league being 2 quarterback league. So it makes sense how much that's helped out the top end teams like the Moncton Meerkats, Trust the Process, and Cup to Canada, and even Sergey with Jalen Hurts, who's currently, I believe, QB3 in the season. And for me, it also makes sense how much, even with all the several top end starters being injured and out, I've been able to compete with having 2 quarterbacks inside the top 5 for the season, so far having started every single week. So one thing that's really, really scary on this that I want to mention is if Geno keeps up his play, Cup to Canada will now have 2 top 6 quarterbacks starting each week. So far, that position has been Cup to Canada's weakest, averaging 9.67 points a week. Obviously, that's been deflated quite a bit because of, I think, Brissett scoring a 0 in week 5. But Geno right now is averaging 19.58 points a week for this season. So that's a 10-point swing for already the league leader in points for. So it's going to get really, really interesting in terms of how this impacts the rest of the season for us. Other sort of quick hits, I just want to mention, Tyreek fucking Hills. 34.08 points for the week, 3 rushing touchdowns, 1 passing touchdown to boot. What a cheat code this guy is, by the way, having a tight end designation. He's likely only going to get around 20 to 30% of the snap share throughout the season, but they are the highest value touches, either in the red zone or design wildcat type runs in the goal line. He's definitely getting the promotion to my starting tight end spot for the rest of the season, even ahead of Kyle Pitts right now, until Kyle Pitts is able to, show up and actually start to figure things out and prove that he deserves that spot. And also, on just last point on Taysom Hill, he's currently the tight end 3 behind Mark Andrews, and Travis Kelce, averaging over 14 points per game. So he's going to have some boom bust weeks, but hey, I think that's going to be a definite boon to my tight end position, which I've only been able to average something like 7 points a week so far. Last couple of points I just want to mention on this is that the Bills offense just looks really, really, really good. Whether it's Gabe Davis putting up Randy Moss type figures, and you saw the photo that I shared on Sleeper Chat, or Stephon Diggs just looking like he can contend for the wide receiver 1 title this year in terms of receiving yards. And I think that's just going to be really, really interesting to sort of see what happens. And it looks like even players like Isaiah McKenzie is viable. The wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, at least the 3rd or the 4th option on passing is even fantasy viable right now too. Last point for just my personal quick hits, I think just this season with concussions is just a little brutal to see. Obviously, there's been a lot of visually jarring things like the Tua's, fencing sort of thing. Even Chris Olave last week, got hit hard, thrown down, hit his head, and thankfully he was able to walk off. But the way that he was sort of holding up his fingers, indicating he's okay, actually made it look like he was not okay. I hope he does get right soon because obviously Olave's got a really, really bright future. And let's not forget what happened to Nyheim Hines on that, I believe, that Thursday night football game. The dude just gets hit, concussed, one of the first plays of the game, stumbles, can't even walk properly, and obviously gets X'd out in the game immediately. So I really hope we don't continue to see these sort of, visually jarring concussions or any concussions for the rest of the season, because obviously it's affecting, our fantasy rosters. But beyond that, you just want these players to be playing healthy and able to produce for their seasons and their own careers. All right, moving over to the actual things that we should be talking about. So, in preparation for this week's Power Rankings, let's continue to look over the stats and the graphs. The top four really, I think, is established now. If you can sort of look at the points for spread there, I think there's a clear gap between the fourth and the fifth right now. Sergey's certainly got a chance still, but I think that gap is starting to sort of crystallize itself there. Max points for, congrats to Cup to Canada on scoring a league record-setting max points for at 260. It's incredible. And obviously he dethrones Ryan, now finally sitting at the number one spot for max points for. And then just sort of the graphs here, nothing much to really look at here. I think, things are starting to stabilize a little bit more, obviously, in this graph. Same thing, it's just the top four versus the bottom four. And then you got the max points for, which sort of shows the same thing. It's the top four versus the bottom four as well. All right, so this brings me back to the playoff target updated slide. Now, as we head into week 6, really the things that I just want to point out is obviously Moncton Meerkats sitting at a perfect 5-0. All he probably needs to do is win just 3 more for the remaining 9 games of the season, which really is simple. It's just going 3-6 and implying a full season record of a 4-10. So I think definitely a playoff lock. And then you see sort of the difference, right? Like sitting at 4-1, I can technically go 4-5 for the rest of the season and still probably make it into the playoffs. Now there's a bit of a competition now. Sort of, I think Full Jerry, Mr. Ambassador, needs to figure out how they can go 6-3 for the remaining 9 games. That's not a tall task. When it was sitting at 6-4 last week, it's a little bit more doable. When you're starting to look at 6-3 and potentially, a 6-2 type of thing, if they are able to sort of leave week 6 with losses, it starts to just get really, really, really daunting. And you can see what that kind of means in terms of the implied full season record that you need to pull off. Again, a 4-putt, good on you, man. Putting up a win there. Now you need to just win 7 more. I believe in you, buddy. But all that said, that gets me ready to share the power rankings for week 6. All right, so starting at number 8, I'm just going to continue calling this the no playoff chance, but upset party. Bills Mafia, he just last all across the board. That's it. Obviously, it's not what he's designed for. So I am really looking, personally, as just a fan of fantasy and fan of football and rookies in general. I'm just really looking forward to Kenny Pickett and Kenneth Walker performing the rest of the season. I think both should be decent options, even for other deeper rosters as well. So it's going to be really interesting. I think if both Kenny and Kenneth are able to become dynasty cornerstones for Bills Mafia's roster, we're going to be looking at a really, really, really interesting and intriguing 2023 season team for the Bills Mafia. Moving over to number 7, I got 4-putt staying put at 7th. First win of the season and back-to-back 100-point plus week, point weeks. If Olave misses time, it will be tough to pull upsets, I think, especially with how he's been playing and what he's been sort of promising. But if Burrow and Rodgers can get into that top 5, top 6 quarterback territory they've been able to do in the last seasons, 4-putt can still pull off a couple upset victories for the rest of the season as well. And certainly this is going to have how 4-putt plays and who he ends up beating. I think is going to have potential playoff seeding ramifications for sure. Last week, if you recall, this was the tier, but this week I've got a new addition to this tier, and unfortunately I'm pulling Full Jerry into this mix now. It's not all on John, obviously. I think he's got one of the worst lucks as a manager, not even just this season. For the new managers this tier, Travis, Sergey, Kyle, the way that Full Jerry's luck has run this season to date so far is the same that it started out last season for him. And it just unfortunately puts you behind, the 8 ball in terms of how you're starting out. It just makes it a really tough uphill climb to get into the playoffs. This week in particular, 3 starters left the game early due to injuries. Damian Harris, Nyheim Hines, and Dalton Schultz basically put up no points between the 3 of them. And even that said, I don't think there's enough firepower to make up the current losing record to get into the playoffs. Obviously, with 9 games remaining, he's going to have to put up at least 6-3 type of a finish. And especially with the full sort of, turnaround of the second leg of the scheduling going up against the same teams that we went in the first 7 weeks of the season. It's just hard to see how he's able to pull off 6 more victories in this, especially with all these injuries that he's had. That said, I think there's still movement for full Jerry. Next 2 weeks are going to be incredibly, incredibly important. But obviously, he's facing a pretty daunting task going up against the league's scariest team in Cup to Canada in week 6. So, all right, that moves it into the outside looking in with a chance. Only team that's in this tier is Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador continues to be consistent, always around that 105 to 119 range. That said, he's also got the max points for with high. He's got decent max points for with high ceiling players, enough to compete each week. I think Jalen Hurts still hasn't had his crazy breakout game yet, but that we're all aware that he can compete. I think Jalen Hurts' ceiling is as high as Lamar Jackson's high as well. We just haven't seen that out of Jalen Hurts this season. That said, Mr. Ambassador, to continue to be in a potential chance to get into the playoffs, he really, really does need to win in week 6 against Moncton Meerkats. Certainly not a easy task whatsoever. But I think this is the week. If there's a week for any of his players to truly break out and for Sergey to finally get into a competitive scoring output week outside of his 105 to 119 range, he's got the players that can do it. And if he pulls up 140 plus type of a week, I think he's giving himself the best chance that he has to pull up an upset victory over Moncton Meerkats and bring Moncton Meerkats down a tier in terms of or away from his pedestal of being an undefeated team in the league so far. All right, so this is now the playoff likely not contender tier. There's been movements here, and it might be a little tough to say that, but anyways, playoff likely not contender. Right now, I'm putting Brady's Third Dynasty, move down a spot into this tier. Continues to be up and down each week without enough top-end firepower. Obviously, he's 4th, but there's a decent amount of gap between the 4th and the 3rd best team in terms of points for as well, and obviously a huge gap from there to the 2nd and 1st. But there's just not enough top-end firepower yet, and he is being hurt at the QB positions because going back on our sort of, the QB, how important QBs are for this season and how much of an advantage you have if you have the top 4 QBs this season compared to the rest. Ryan doesn't have anyone inside of that. So he is being hurt with Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, able to plug in Jared Goff here and there, but obviously we saw last week that Jared Goff is Jared Goff. Carson Wentz came off on fire, but Carson Wentz is Carson Wentz. So he's getting hurt at the QB positions, and he's got huge names at the wide receiver positions, but the fact that they're paired together is causing a lot of inconsistency and unreliability there. That said, Brady's Third Dynasty is likely going to end up with at least a 4th seed, but if the top 5 version of Deshaun Watson that we've seen since basically his full time as a starter comes in when he gets off of suspension, I believe in week 12 or week 13, this team's going to be really, really scary in the playoffs because quarterback is really the largest deficiency that Brady's Third Dynasty has right now. And if he's able to have Deshaun putting up 25 points a week like he's done in the first sort of 2-3 seasons of his rookie full-time starter role back in Houston, this team's going to be really, really scary and not a team that I want to be facing week 1 of playoffs. All right, playoff favorite. I think the fact that I'm sitting at 4-1 now, it makes it very hard and difficult for me to not make the playoffs. It's going to be hard for me to say that I'm a contender right now, especially with just how strong Eve and Kyle are playing. But it was really positive what I've been able to see the last 2 weeks. Breece Hall and Travis Etienne both grown in their own roles. Hall's already an RB1, but Etienne is unsure, but he's certainly increasing the snap share each week. And I started to look at ETN as what I would if I was assessing a rookie. And then he's increasing all the little micro and macro numbers that you want to be seeing in terms of opportunity increases, snap share increases, and just the productivity and what the team essentially and the coaches put their faith behind it. So I am really intrigued about ETN. And if he's able to turn into a top 15 type of running back this season, even with the injuries like a Javonte being out, I think both the increase of Breece Hall and ETN should be plenty enough for me to be able to get really high back top end firepower again. Last thing on my team is just tight end's been my biggest deficiency all throughout the season, with obviously Kyle Pitts just goosing the first few weeks of the season and out with an injury. Was able to get decent sort of output from David Njoku, thankfully, this week. But Taysom Hill, if he's able to continue to get these sort of 20-30% super high value touches in snap count for the rest of the season, I think he's going to single-handedly manage and add a meaningful amount of weekly differences to the current tight end output. I believe I'm averaging something like 6 or 7 or 8 points or something like that. So that's what I'm looking forward to most. This team's, obviously, I think I've got a chance to get into contender tier. Or I may come up short, a tier well below the actual contenders, but I think it's getting very, very close to a playoff lock. If I end up at 5-1, certainly I think it's going to be easy to sort of call that at that point. All right, moving over to true contenders. No movements here, guys. As I mentioned, Cup to Canada still needs to sit second until at least I want to say week 8, week 9, week 10, when I start to really put the power rankings in terms of what I think the contender likelihood sort of looks like. But Cup to Canada right now, in terms of week-to-week output, he's in a tier of his own. He's 10 points a week ahead of Moncton Meerkats, who sits second, and then 20 points a week better than Trust the Process, sitting third. He scored a league high and league record of 194.98, getting a 0 at the QB2 position, with Jacoby Brissett being injured in the first play of the game. And also set 260 plus max points for this week, which I've just never seen a number like that. So looking at his roster, I think I have a hard time saying that he's going to have anything more than 2 losses max for the rest of the season. It means that he's going to be sitting at a nice 10-4. In the worst case, I think he's got a good chance to win out the rest of the season, or maybe even go 1 loss. So this is going to be a really, really interesting. And I think Cup to Canada, certainly even sitting 2 games back behind Kyle, still has a really good chance to finish this league with the season record, sitting number 1 in terms of the standings. Going over to Moncton Meerkats, man, what is this? The 4th straight week of him being at the number 1 position now. Continues to set the record of the longest standing number 1 power ranking team in CCK dynasty history. Still undefeated, so it's hard, to move him away until Kyle gives anyone a reason why he should move down. This is his that he deserves, and likely, if looking at the next of the schedule, he will also likely finish the season, or at least the first leg of schedule, the first 7 weeks when we've gone through the entire league of matchups. He will likely finish at 7-0 for that first leg. Eckler is a player that I've been mentioning just from a concerning standpoint. It's been 2 straight weeks now with Eckler being efficient on the ground, and this week it was even better than week 4. So I think Eckler, as long as he continues to put up, I believe his RB1 right now, which is incredible. So I think Moncton Meerkats obviously going to continue to be very, very scary. It's certainly a contender. That said, the only vulnerability that I see in Moncton Meerkats is in a week where Lamar doesn't put up his usual numbers. So if he's 15 like he was last week, Moncton Meerkats has to look a little bit more beatable. But if Lamar's putting up 30 plus like he's had in the first 3 weeks of the season, or 2 of the first 3 weeks of the season, it gets really incredible to difficult to be able to even think about being able to beat a team like this right now. So anyways, I got these 2 teams in a tier of their own, continues to be in their tier of their own. Potential for some movements over the next couple of weeks, certainly. But this is the power rankings as I've put it. Not much movement, except just the swapping of Trusted Process and Brady Stewart Dynasty for this week. And that does it for my weekly power rankings heading into week 6. Enjoy Thursday, Sunday, and Monday, boys. Peace.